Last week, representatives of China, Japan, and South Korea came together to give a joint statement about their intent to improve trade relations and present a more united response to U.S. tariffs. Anyone familiar with the complex history shared by these three nations knows that it takes a lot to make them play nice. In fact, this was their first trade relations meeting in over 5 years. Across the globe, world leaders have been taking similar measures to come to grips with the chaos emanating from the White House. Today, less than a week after Trump's tariff announcement, markets are crashing across the globe, projected recession risk is up, protests are all over the United States, and we're seeing global changes we haven't seen in a generation. This global chaos following Trump's Liberation Day tariff announcement is only the latest episode in the craziest first 2 months of any U.S. presidency. Starting on Inauguration Day, Trump was already making tariff threats targeted at Canada and Mexico before initiating a game of tariff ping-pong with the two countries. On the foreign policy and security front, the administration had a surprising message for allies on their first high-level visit to Europe. Speaking at the Munich Security Conference, Vice President J.D. Vance had nothing nice to say about the European allies.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
This was immediately followed by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth making similarly blistering comments about Europe's contribution to the Russia-Ukraine war and the presence of U.S. troops in Europe. Shortly after this, the U.S. voted with Russia to oppose a resolution condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine. And then Zelensky showed up to the White House for what turned out to be the meeting from hell.
Have you said thank you once this entire meeting? No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you? You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you can...
He's not speaking loudly. He's not speaking loudly. Your country is in big trouble.
On each of these subjects, world leaders have been playing catch-up. The Trump administration came out swinging, and everyone else is still reaching for their gloves. As European leaders have started to frame a path forward on supporting Ukraine and fostering greater self-reliance, the U.S. has already moved on to Greenland. Closer to home, Canada and Greenland have been on the receiving end of varying degrees of threatening remarks. Meanwhile, in the week since Trump's tariff announcement, the S&P 500 has lost almost 20%, with signs that losses could continue. And JP Morgan has raised its probability of a recession in 2025 to 60%. This could get drastically worse as countries start to retaliate, sparking a full-scale trade war. This all begs the question, why? In this video, I will discuss tariffs and trade, along with security and other foreign policy actions to find the method to this madness, and to show why this chaos is part of a plan to upend the free world as we know it. I will show that whether this plan succeeds or not, we're probably seeing the last days of the liberal global order that has shaped the post-war world. So what is the plan? Trump himself has given different and sometimes contradictory explanations for his tariff obsession. Reason number one is that tariffs are an attempt to bring back manufacturing jobs to the US. A full analysis of this reasoning would require a video of its own, but the long and short of it is that economic experts generally hold that the tariffs alone cannot achieve this outcome. There would need to be a comprehensive industrial policy that subsidizes the kind of capital investment necessary to start moving manufacturing back to the United States. Understandably, this would take a long time of consistent policy, something this administration has so far failed to provide. Reason number two is pretty simple. To quote Trump himself, the tariffs will help raise billions and billions in revenue. This reasoning is mutually exclusive with reason number one, because if manufacturing is reshored and Americans consume locally made products, there would be no significant tariff revenue collected. Conversely, if there were a lot of tariffs collected, that would mean that manufacturing has not been significantly reshored. Reason number three is that tariffs are a tool for negotiating better trade. It is conceivable to see how tariffs can be used for leverage, But if quick trade negotiations are the goal, the US could have achieved this without risking crashing the economy. Additionally, the indiscriminate nature of the tariffs makes the prospect of quick negotiations highly unlikely. So that leaves reason number 4. I believe that tariffs, along with an altered security posture, are part of a grand plan to completely reorganize global relations. Put simply, Trump is trying to use a combination of US economic power and US military power together to generate the highest possible leverage to renegotiate the terms of everything, not just trade. This plan will upend security alliances in the entire global economic system and reshape them in Trump's own image. If he is successful, Trump hopes to sign a world-changing Mar-a-Lago agreement, replacing the Bretton Woods and neoliberal orders that have dominated for decades. In this way, he would make himself a truly generational figure. This hypothesis is the most ambitious and most difficult to achieve, but in this video, I will show why it may be the only one that could possibly justify the absolute chaos we're seeing in the world right now. Every other hypothesis is either incomplete or lacks enough payoff to justify the great risk Trump has taken. Whatever the reason, there is clearly a global realignment happening, and it raises a lot of questions. Are we witnessing the end of US hegemony? Will these changes last beyond Trump? Is this chaos part of an intentional and comprehensive plan? And perhaps most importantly, will the free world still exist after all this, or are we witnessing the historic end days of the West? In this video, we will explore some of these questions. Let me know in the comments below if you would like me to create a series exploring the geopolitical implications of the US's isolationist foreign and trade policy. In the meantime, if you find my work informative or helpful in any way, please like this video and subscribe to this channel to help us reach more people. Before we can answer any question about the end of the free world or the West, which I am using interchangeably, we have to define how I am using these terms. To be clear, I am using these terms in an economic, political, and geopolitical context. These terms derive from a series of informal and formal agreements that helped create the global order. First through the Bretton Woods Agreement of 1944, which created the global monetary system with the US dollar as a global reserve currency, and the foundation of NATO in 1949, which underpinned the security of this new global order. This was redefined and expanded during and after the Cold War, such that I am referring to the economic and liberal value system which stretches around the world from the US to places as far as South Korea and New Zealand. Security and economics are integral to this definition, so I will be exploring each of them in turn. The security half of this plan has been in action for a while. Among the leaked messages from the Signal group chat involving President Trump's national security leaders was an exchange between U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance and U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. In this exchange, Vance writes, "If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again." In response, Hegseth says this, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic." This reveals that high-ranking members of this administration have deep-seated contempt for some of the U.S.'s closest allies. Just over a month before this chat leaked, J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth were on their maiden visit to Europe, where they left allies flabbergasted. The rhetoric of Europe as a freeloader has been used so often that it is now taken for granted in many sections of the U.S. right. This language obviously denigrates U.S. allies and creates uncertainty, which is useful leverage for previously unthinkable renegotiation of terms. Championed by people like Tucker Carlson and Steve Miller. The first article of faith of this worldview is that the U.S. should abandon the responsibilities of its foreign alliances and instead operate on a purely transactional basis. Vance, it seems, is a true believer in this vision of a United States that does not lead by example, but rather intervenes for pay. A United States that either sits out entirely or exacts a pound of flesh for any action that may benefit anyone else. This view is of course at odds with the idea of a united West, bound by mutual alliances and mutual values, and it most certainly is not consistent with being a leader of the free world. When Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky came to the White House for what turned out to be perhaps the worst televised meeting in history, we were witnessing the first victim of this agenda. After weeks of the Trump administration calling him a dictator, withholding intelligence information, and pausing military aid shipments, Zelensky had finally come to the White House to bend the knee and to sign a deal that would give up a vast portion of his nation's rare earth and mineral reserves. This was the plan all along, to remove the security blanket that the US has extended to allies for decades, and then charge an exorbitant price to re-extend it. This is the working model of Trump and Vance's security plan. It sets the precedent that there is no cause worth defending. In the end, US assistance will be predicated on how much your country gives up, like a classic mob protection racket. This position presents a sudden and dangerous abdication of responsibility by the US. Europe and other allies are the next targets, as shown by Steve Miller's text in the same leaked group chat. In response to Vance and Hegseth, he writes the following. As I heard it, the president was clear. Green light. But we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement. E.g., if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the US successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain extracted in return. That's the game they're playing. The ascended isolationist position on the US right sees security as a chip to be traded in and a service to be sold. It is irrelevant to them that US hegemony has been so powerful because it was supported by willing allies who ensure that the US has never had to fight alone in its foreign wars in the Middle East. European powers have enabled the US to gain outsized military advantage on the understanding that a strong United States is good for everyone. To disturb this trust is to incentivize new European militarization that will operate with greater independence, ending the great Western behemoth alliance that has dominated affairs since the Cold War. After testing this tactic in Ukraine, the Trump administration has begun breeding insecurity by making moves on Greenland, regardless of Greenlandic and Danish protests. And of course, we have seen the repeated jokes designed to threaten Canadian sovereignty. This bull in a china shop approach to diplomacy is designed to cause insecurity. The US is sending the message that they may not only stop protecting allies, but may become the source of insecurity. The free world was nominally a democratic foil to the authoritarianism of the Soviet Union and its satellite states. But now, the US seems envious of Russia's unquestioned dominance within its sphere. For people like Vance, the collapse of the rules-based order may be a desirable outcome because the rules are a limitation to a great power like the US. They may prefer a return to a world of spheres of influence, and might makes right, where claims on smaller neighbors like Greenland and Canada are fair game. For now, Europe has stood united. In Germany, the new Chancellor Friedrich Merz has made steps to begin rearming Germany, and has spoken of an urgent need to wean Europe from US hegemony. France, as the largest nuclear power on the European continent, has floated the idea of being the nuclear guarantor of European security in the absence of the US. And the UK is finding new common ground with the formerly adversarial EU. This sets the stage for geopolitical uncoupling, which I believe is a long-term harm to the United States' interests. All this is bad enough. Certainly enough to possibly destroy the greatest alliance that has ever existed. But it is only one half of the plan. The second prong in this all-stick, no-carrot approach is tariffs. On April 2nd, the president announced reciprocal tariffs that will affect everyone from the United Kingdom to the Heard and McDonald Islands. Good luck finding that last one on a map, or better yet, finding someone from there. But they've been slapped with a 10% tariff anyway, because why not? Trump's tariffs are here, and they are tanking markets from New York to Tokyo. Many have struggled to understand the strategy behind these actions, but fortunately, one of the architects of this policy has given some strong indications. In an article published in The Economist in October 2024, Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, laid out the reasoning behind the tariff policy and stated that it is part of a larger push to tie together economic and security interests in a restructured global order where the U.S. can extract more value. According to this view, the disintegration of the current economic and political order is intentional. President Trump is setting up a historic change. going from the Bretton Woods system to neoliberalism and now to Trumpism, by treating the rest of the world like naughty children, withdrawing trade and security privileges, and then renegotiating the terms of reinserting those privileges. Trump hopes to cement his place as a truly generational figure. The tariffs play a pivotal role because while the security half of the plan is by necessity largely rhetorical, tariffs are a more palatable jumping-off point, and they have a secondary effect of weakening economies and military spending anyway. If the plan succeeds, the new system will be similar to the Bretton Woods system, centered on the US dollar, firmly established as the reserve currency, and the US as the guarantor of trade and international security. The only difference is that the US will exact more control over participating nations and likely extract greater concessions for the privilege of being included in this market and security umbrella. On the other hand, these tariffs have the potential to spark a trade war and cause so much economic damage that the Trump administration may not be able to see it through. Less than a week into the tariff regime, this has already been one of the worst weeks in US stock market history. As other nations begin to seek alternative trade networks that are less dependent on the US, multilateral formations like BRICS might finally have an opportunity to shine, and China might finally have an opportunity to take the center stage in global trade. While many countries may use conciliatory language in the short term and even enter negotiations, all prudent policymakers across the globe will begin preparing for a vastly altered trade landscape. The combined response from China, Japan, and Korea is still pending, but there is no doubt that this upheaval is a rare opportunity for an unlikely alliance to form. Canada has already retaliated to the US tariffs, and has made many overtures to European allies for greater cooperation, suggesting they are looking across the Atlantic to break their US dependence. Across the globe, world leaders are reaching out to each other to mitigate the chaos. New deals are being made, and organic multilateral order is forming. For now, the Trump administration can only watch and wait, and hope that the collateral damage is not too great. In conclusion, it looks like Trump has made the biggest gamble of his entire administration. He appears willing to sacrifice the US's long-standing dominance, piss off longtime allies, and risk internal economic and political meltdown for the chance to create a new global order with his name on it. Whether you call it global Trumpism or the Mar-a-Lago Accords, the ambition is brazen. But it seems highly unlikely that this will succeed. For starters, Trump lacks the long-term vision and methodical execution necessary to even have a chance. So far, his approach has been haphazard and unpredictable, spamming the tariff button like a kid seeing a light switch for the first time. Secondly, the conditions are just not right. The previous paradigm shifts that Trump is emulating were executed at historical high watermarks of US power and credibility. For instance, the Bretton Woods system and neoliberal system were both conceived at peaks of US power, enabling the strongest possible negotiating position. Bretton Woods followed the US's leading role in the Second World War at a time when the US was basically bankrolling Europe. On the other hand, neoliberalism was a longer-term transition started during the Nixon administration, strengthened at the height of Ronald Reagan's popularity, and then continually enhanced in bipartisan fashion by George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, respectively. And this came in the aftermath of the US's resounding victory in the Cold War. The US simply does not have the same conditions now. If anything, the Trump presidency has historically low credibility. Trump faces historic polarization at home and mistrust abroad. Instead of negotiating after a heroic contribution to the world, they are looking to negotiate after simply picking up the ball mid-game and demanding a change of rules like a petulant child. What would the world look like if Trump had his way? Would it be a world where US dominance is so enhanced that it is virtually unquestioned? Would it be a world where allies are turned to vassal states, where the US can squeeze Canada and take over Greenland without opposition? Would it be a world where the US can flout democratic values and international law without consequence? If so, can we then conclude that this is an effort to end the free world? The answers to these questions are complex, but one thing is clear. Only 2 months into the Trump administration, the world has already changed drastically. Even if Trump is forced to abandon these aggressive actions, this bell simply cannot be unrung. Allies are now aware of just how vulnerable they are when they depend on the US as a guarantor of peace, security, and rule of law in the world. NATO allies are now aware that it takes one aberrational US president to strip them of their security. The only reasonable response to these threats is to begin developing an independent infrastructure of bilateral and multilateral ties elsewhere. Looking into the future, the 2028 election may bring change in a Democratic president, or more of the same in a Vance presidency. So is it time to declare the end of the free world? Well, probably not. Not yet, anyway. But we are only 2 months into an administration that is sweeping like a tornado, and there are signs and wonders everywhere. Japan, China, and Korea are acting like good buddies. German rearmament is back in style. And every single nation on the planet has a reason to be pissed off with the United States. In my view, the free world may not be dead and buried just yet, but the Trump administration has dealt a major blow in just 2 months. And there are 46 more months to go. In my next video, I will have a detailed explanation of why I believe the Trump tariffs will fail and fail badly. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned. As always, thank you.